These are the American citizens permanently separated from their loved ones. These are the families the media ignores. These are the stories that Democrats and people that are weak on immigration, they don't want to discuss.
So in the aftermath of the crisis that everyone, including Republicans, said was of his own making, the president, that is, and his closest advisors, he didn't try to spend today focusing on how you're going to do the reunification. Instead, he decided to talk about the plight of thousands of kids, and not the ones that are detained or separated from their families, but the president instead focused on violence from the undocumented immigrants, caused by undocumented immigrants. He held the event with parents who had their kids killed by these folks. Definitely a tragic situation, period. You can only feel for the pain these parents share. But a lot of people are saying to call this tone deaf is to be polite here. Thousands of kids are living in cages that had nothing to do with the violence perpetrated on those poor families. But they don't know where their parents are. They don't belong in a cage like an animal. And there are still no clear answers when or if they'll see their families and whether the government has a plan or let alone an incentive to try and reunite them. But one thing is very clear. Trump has unleashed a policy without a plan to carry it out. This 7-year-old boy, separated from his mother at the border a month ago, now back in her arms. A senior White House official telling the Associated Press approximately 500 other migrant children have also been reunited with their parents since May. But still, hundreds and hundreds more kids being held in shelters and foster care facilities across this country, they remain in limbo. Among those waiting, Alison Jimena Valencia Madrid from El Salvador. Heard in this recording, first obtained by ProPublica, which reports that the 6-year-old is now in a facility in Phoenix, more than 1,200 miles from her mother, detained in Texas. The girl that goes by Jimena heard begging a supervisor to call her aunt. And Wednesday, ProPublica, they were there listening to one of those calls.
The fact that Jimena was able to memorize this phone number turned out to be a really lucky thing for her. Many of the kids who come to this country who are her age or below, don't know things like phone numbers.
At least for the next 20 days, families caught crossing the border illegally will be detained together while the adults await court hearings. The Pentagon says it is looking into options for housing some 20,000 unaccompanied children in military facilities near the border, but it's unclear where families will be held. And we're getting more details on just how ill-prepared the government is to try and put these families together, which after the executive order was supposed to be like this. This from a piece in today's Washington Post. Quote, the U.S. government spent months developing the family separation system, but authorities, they're struggling to figure out how to reunite the detained parents with the children. No system for immigration and customs enforcement in place, which handled the parents' cases, to work on the issue with the Refugee Resettlement Office, which is responsible for the children. Now, attorneys, they've described heart-wrenching meetings with their clients who ask again and again for any information about their children, often weeping in South Texas detention centers, one of them saying, we have to say we don't know where your child is. The government is responsible for keeping your child safe. No parent would be satisfied with that answer. And in D.C., the blame game in full swing. Here is President Trump looking to point fingers.
Democrats don't care about the impact of uncontrolled migration on your communities, your schools, your hospitals, your jobs, or your safety. Democrats put illegal immigrants before they put American citizens. What the hell is going on?
Of course, that's a lie. But here is this morning's tweet, quote, Republicans, this is again from our president here, who just said he was going to do whatever he had to do to get immigration reform. Remember, that was this week's news cycle. Now, this is what he tweets this morning. Republicans should stop wasting their time on immigration until after we elect more senators and congressmen or women in November. Democrats are just playing games, have no intention of doing anything to solve this decades-old problem. We can pass great legislation after the red wave. And nobody believes there'll be a red wave. But anyway, yesterday, the House of Representatives failed to pass an immigration bill sponsored by conservative members. Republican leadership postponed votes on the more moderate measure. It was supposed to hit the floor yesterday, but Speaker Paul Ryan scrapped it after yesterday's failure. Translation, they're not going to get anything passed. Now, some of the administration, they're in full damage control mode, or they just have terrible memories about what they have said in the past. And if you want Exhibit A, look no further than our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Here he is on the Christian Broadcasting Network today. Listen to what he said.
Well, it hasn't been good. And the American people don't like the idea that we're separating families. We never really intended to do that. What we intended to do was to make sure that adults who bring children into the country are charged with the crime they've committed.
Okay, so to be clear, the Attorney General said no one ever intended to separate parent and child. Never the plan of this. Okay, here's this same guy just last month.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. And that child may be separated from you as required by law.
Same guy. Okay, now you can get whiplash listening to those two sound bites. But I heard a soundbite, and I'm curious, Senator. To me, I think this gets to the dirty little secret about what Trump is really trying to say without using the exact words. This was on Fox and Friends this morning. Brian Kilmeade, listen to what he had to say.
Like it or not, these aren't our kids. Show them compassion. But it's not like he's doing this to the people of Idaho or Texas. These are people from another country.
These aren't our kids. Now, yeah, that's a moron on a morning show. But I believe that's really what the president and code is telling his people. Listen, they're not us. They don't look like us. So who really cares? Yeah, they're kids, but they're not our kids. No, that's really what's being said here, isn't it?
And it's been said all along in this presidency. And this was a turning point, honestly, for people of goodwill. I think that this subtle and sometimes overt racism and xenophobia and turning it back on the history of America's immigration policy and welcoming, this has been consistent all along, but now he has done something that really caused him political problem he didn't anticipate. He never anticipated, I think, that Republicans would turn on him, and maybe others have turned on him as well. But I don't think he understood that this was crossing a line. He's crossed a lot of lines. This was a line that most people would not accept.
And you know, Andrew, I find it interesting, and as you mentioned before, Andrew has worked and lived in Texas in the past. The border state Republicans, even in red states like Texas, etc., they came out quick against what this president did because, to me at least, yes, we cannot have open borders. We need to have an immigration policy in this country. There needs to be checks and balances. Not everyone gets to just walk in whenever they want. However, for the people who see these people, this population that comes in, they know what they had to go through to come here. Mm-hmm. They know what they're fleeing in many cases. They can sometimes relate. If it was me and I was living in that situation, I'd do anything for my kid to get here. And when they get here, what kind of jobs they do, etc. I found it very telling that the Ted Cruzes of the world came out hard and fast against this policy when they have kissed up and basically looked the other way to this president, a bunch of other stuff. But on this one, they know how this plays in border states.
Well, there are any number of legal and illegal immigrants in border states, yes, where there are people who are now citizens who vote. There are family members of the people who are crossing. So there are communities here. These are not strangers. They might not be known by everybody as they come across, but they know them because they either, have had experiences like that within their families, or they know of people who have had experiences, or they're, but for the grace of God goes me. So there is a certain empathy there. And so yes, even hardline Republicans like Ted Cruz have to, some of it's politics and some of it is just what they're hearing from their constituents. But you also, and so I'm not surprised that some of the border state Republicans are opposing this as much as they have. You also sort of hit on, I think, what's another level of despicable with all this, that the president then turns around and tries to sell a false choice, that it's either separate families at the border or you have open borders, and people can have free run to do anything. Nobody's proposing open borders. Nobody wants lawlessness on the border, but you're also talking about an administration that wants to curtail legal immigration in this country. So what are people who are looking to flee horrible conditions supposed to do? If you're not going to let them in one way and you're not going to let them in the other way, they're still going to try to come to this country. It is a false choice. And I thought the display earlier today with the families of victims, I thought was just a disgrace. And I thought it was...
and there's a little color to this, which is, as we described, and you see the pictures, the president used the grief of these families.
Yeah, he used them.
And like he's used people before in the past, there's props here to either change the subject for him or to demonize someone else. As if some 2-year-old kid that was brought into this country from Guatemala killed their child. And then, Andrew, just to show how tacky he is, the photos of their dead children, what did he do?
He signed them. He signed them and he said something along the lines of, like, this will make them more valuable. But so he signed them. And if you can see when they're holding up the photos, or if you look later, you can see his signature usually on the sides of each one. And look, to be fair about this, the White House would argue that what they did with these families today is what the media or the Democrats are doing with these kids. They're finding the pictures, they're finding the sounds of these kids, and using them to try to change hearts and minds in a way that they would probably say isn't fair. But
they're not equivalent issues.
I agree.
They're not equivalent issues.
And he created it.
And this is emblematic of his divisiveness about every issue that goes to where people in America decide. We have divisions over this issue. A president's job is to find a common path with their own principles. They were elected for them, but not in this most ugly, divisive way. This is really, to me, this strikes at the core of American values. And I think those that have spoken up, more people have to speak up, and more people have to participate in this.
When we come back, we're going to leave the subject of immigration and actually go to the state capitol in Albany. And we're going to ask the senator, as they've just wrapped up the legislative session, about some major items that are still hanging out there, like legalized gambling. Stay with us.